he'd have fought to the last, would have focused every ounce of anger and bile on resisting. She had pleaded, begged, and in the end cried feebly and howled. Life was cheap, he thought, because the general populace failed to appreciate its value. He understood. He constantly pushed himself to the limits of his capability, strove to learn, to surpass. He burned with a thirst for knowledge like others craved money, making it hard to find an equal. That was why he'd been forced to kill. Without her sacrifice, he would forever have been surrounded by women unable to satisfy his intellect. He listened to a language CD as he drove. He liked to learn a new language each year. This time, it was Spanish. Easier than many, he admitted to himself guiltily, but then he'd had an exhausting amount of other matters on his mind. He couldn't be expected to pick up anything more complex whilst doing so much research and travelling. It's not as if I've had any free time. A rabbit dashed out from the verge. He slammed on his brakes, less from a desire to avoid it than with the shock of the movement in his peripheral vision. Damn it! He was distracted, and he'd been talking to himself again. He only did that when he was overtired and stressed. He'd stayed up late, arguing. Whoever thought it was an easy task, persuading an intelligent woman to do what was best for her, was a fool. It was a challenge, even for a man of his faculties. The brighter the woman, the harder it was, but rewarding in the end. He pulled over at the outskirts of Edinburgh and drank passably warm coffee from a flask. He couldn't risk going into a cafe. In spite of the lack of interest he was likely to generate, no one wanted to stare at a middle-aged, saggy-bellied man with an unsightly bald patch. It would be stupid to have his likeness caught on CCTV returning to the city along this route. The Spanish voice droned in the background until he hit the off switch. It was such a big day. Why shouldn't he take a break for once? A lady was waiting at home, needing substantial care and attention. She wouldn't be able to talk clearly for a while. In fact, she would probably need speech therapy. Luckily for her, he was a gifted tutor in many fields. It would be his pleasure and privilege to assist. Chapter 2. Detective Inspector Luc Callanach wondered how long it would take for the jibes to stop, and they hadn't even started yet. It was his second day with Police Scotland's major investigations team in Edinburgh, and he'd found himself in a depressingly grey, ageing building that couldn't have looked less like a hub of cutting-edge criminal investigation. Yesterday had been an easy introduction, consisting only of briefings and meetings with superiors too aware of political correctness to dare crack any gags about his accent or nationality. Those who ranked below him wouldn't be so obliging. It seemed unlikely that Police Scotland had ever had to integrate a half-French, half-Scots detective before. Callanach was scheduled to give a meet-and-greet speech, explain how he intended to operate and what his expectations were of the men and women in his command. It would be bad enough when they saw him. Archetypally European, with unruly dark hair, brown eyes, olive skin, and an aquiline nose. Once he opened his mouth, it would only get worse. He glanced at his watch and knew they'd be sharpening their collective wits. Keeping them waiting wasn't going to improve things. Not that he particularly cared what they thought of him, but he was all for an easy life where he could get it. "Quiet. Let's get started," he said, writing his name on a board and ignoring the incredulous looks. "I've only recently moved from France, and it will take some time for us to adjust to one another's accents, so speak clearly and slowly." There was a silence until what sounded like, "You've got to be fucking kidding," came from the far end of the room, where too many bodies were crowded together to identify the speaker. It was followed immediately by a shushing noise that was distinctly female in origin. Callanach rubbed his forehead,